Democracy Now! Is the best media outlet when it comes to Latin America. And Democracy Now! Is an independent media outlet where your chances of getting objective information is about the best you can get anywhere. They're not subject to corporate fascism. They're not subject to powerful vested interests. It is an independent media outlet in the United States. It's based in New York. The anchor of the show is Amy Goodman, and this guy right here, Juan Gonzalez. They have been on this show for years and years and years, and they have produced something that is, well, I know of no other radio station in the world, an independent media radio outlet that is so sophisticated and so objective in their news coverage, especially on Latin America. So that's where you should go if you want real information on Latin America. Today, right here on our local television station here in Copenhagen, TV Street Space, TV Gaderummet, I want to take a couple of clips of something extremely current right now going on in New York. This is the autumn of 2012, and a film has just been released. The film is based on the book by this guy you see right here, Juan Gonzalez. He wrote a book some years back, and now the book has been filmed and is having a premiere in New York this autumn 2012, in New York and in California. I hope it'll be in Copenhagen, Denmark, and Europe, the rest of Europe, very soon. The sooner the better. This is a book on the causes of illegal immigration in the United States. A hot topic up to the elections with Obama and Mitt Romney. I don't think any sizable proportion of the United States today, of the population of the United States, actually knows why, how so many illegal immigrants actually ended up going to the United States. However, this book, this film, uncovers those reasons. The reasons, they are caused by American foreign policy in Latin America, disrupting these countries, causing chaos, being behind assassinations, murders, and the plundering of Latin America. This stuff is documented. It is not made up. Anybody can check the sources of information here. 200 schools in the United States have this now as obligatory reading in their schools. So something is happening, something for the good is changing in the United States. And who knows, as Leonard Cohen says and sings, democracy is coming to the USA. I just hope it gets here before all hell and Armageddon breaks loose. Okay, I'd like to get now to, we'll start now some shots and takes on this flick, and I'm going to send it into two sections, two half-hour sections on our local television. Part one will be coming on right now. Just check it out, listen, and enjoy it.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A new report by the National Hispanic Media Coalition has found media portrayals of Latinos and immigrants are fueling rampant negative stereotypes among the general population. The organization called on the Federal Communications Commission to study the impacts of hate speech in the media. This comes at a time when immigration has become a key issue in the 2012 presidential race. Both President Obama and his Republican challenger Mitt Romney answered tough questions about immigration and deportation when they appeared on the Spanish-language network Univision last week. Obama made news again Friday when the White House said a new federal policy that grants some young immigrants temporary legal status to stay in the country will not make them eligible for health insurance under the new health care law. Meanwhile, appearing Sunday on ABC's This Week, conservative pundit Ann Coulter argued immigrant rights should not be considered civil rights. Host George Stephanopoulos asked Coulter about her claim.
Immigrant rights are not civil rights?
No, I think civil rights are for blacks.
See, this is essentially the problem, and the Republicans
What have we done to the immigrants? We owe black people something. We have a legacy of slavery. Immigrants haven't even been in this country.
Well, at this time of this heated and divisive debate over immigration, we turn to a new documentary out this week, Harvest of Empire, the untold story of Latinos in America. The film is based on a book by Juan Gonzalez, Democracy Now! Co-host, New York Times columnist. The film examines how and New York Daily News columnist. The film examines how U.S. intervention in Latin America and the Caribbean forced millions of people to leave their homes to migrate to the United States. We'll be joined by Juan and the film's co-director in a minute, but first a clip from the trailer for Harvest of Empire.
Once again, the streets of our country were taken over today by people who don't belong here.
When the immigrants come, they come with a culture of criminality. It's out of control.
They put a strain on our Social Security, our education, our health care.
They never teach us in school that the huge Latino presence here is a direct result of our own government's actions in Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central America over many decades. Thousands upon thousands of Puerto Ricans were actually recruited to come work here in the United States.
The feeling was we could very easily overthrow this progressive government and make it a lot easier for the United Fruit Company and other American businesses to operate in Central America.
From the very beginning, the West depended for its labor on Mexicans.
Are you a communist, Peter? Wait for the history. The history will say what we are.
I had never seen anything like El Salvador. I was more frightened there than Vietnam. What was going on there was the slaughter of the innocents.
When you finance and train a gang of uniformed butchers and they begin wholesale killing, the people don't emigrate. They flee.
The instability that we have contributed to creates the kind of chaos and disarray that leads to more immigration.
I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots, even though they may have entered illegally.
The reality is that America is changing. By the end of this century, a majority of the people will trace their origins not to Europe, but to Latin America.
We're all humans, we all have the same abilities, we all have the same potential.
America has always been a nation in the process of becoming, in process of change. It is an immigrant nation.
An excerpt of Harvest of Empire premiering this week in New York and Los Angeles, based on the book Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America, by the award-winning journalist and Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez. Juan, again, a co-host with the New York Daily News, author of 3 other books, including News for All the People, The Epic Story of Race in the American Media, which is also just out in paperback, and founder and past president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. We're very pleased that Juan is with us here in the New York studio, not in his usual guest chair, but as a guest, not in his usual host chair, but as a guest today. And along with the film's co-director, Eduardo Lopez, we welcome you both to Democracy Now!
Thanks, and it's a different perspective on this side of the table.
That's right. So, you wrote this book years ago, Juan. Then it came out again, updated, and now it's in a film. Why have you chosen to go this route?
Well, it wasn't my choice, really. It was the producers who came to me several years ago. They've actually been working on this film for about, I think it's 7 years now? 7 years. Yeah, and they came to me several years ago that they really were excited about the perspective that my book was putting out. My book actually came out in 1999 initially, and it's now, I think, used in about 200 college courses around the country as sort of an introductory survey text taxed on the Latino community in the United States. And they said they wanted to make it into a film. And I said, are you sure? My book is kind of more of a history, and it's kind of complicated because it goes into every one of the different Latino groups in the country, how they came here, what drove them here. But they said they thought they had a way to do it.
Eduardo, the way?
The way was quite difficult because it was a 7-year journey between the time we first met with Juan about the book and today. And I really would not be sitting here with you if it wasn't for the hard work and sacrifice of the producer of the film, Wendy Thompson Marcus. And with her, we felt in 2005 that the kind of language that was being used to describe immigrants, and specifically Latino immigrants in the media, was just unacceptable. Every night you would hear very derogatory terms being used to describe us. And we being, both of us being Latino immigrants, Wendy from Peru and me from El Salvador, we knew the real story. And we had read the real story in Juan's book, and we just felt compelled to take action because we really felt that the United States, that our fellow citizens needed to know why Latinos had come to the United States, the real reasons, the roots, the root causes of immigration. And in just about all of the cases when you look at history, you see very clearly, as Juan explains in the book, that our different waves of migration are connected to actions that the United States took in our countries in different times for different reasons. But it's very consistent throughout history, this connection between our foreign policy and immigration.
And so, Juan, now, I mean, the first day of the Democratic Convention in Charlotte, a bus pulled up in front of the gates, the Undocu bus, and scores of people got out chanting, "No papers, no fear." 10 got arrested in the pouring rain as the police poured in. Immigration is one of the key issues of this election year, and yet you don't have presidential candidates who have a vastly different approach to it.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's increasingly become an issue not just in the big cities where New York, LA, and Miami, but in the heartland of America, and especially in the South, where in North Carolina, for instance, there's been a huge increase in the Latino population of North Carolina, but most people don't understand how those Latinos got there. It's a largely Guatemalan migration, and it's largely people who were recruited in the 80s and 90s to come and work in the textile mills of North Carolina, because part of what I try to show in the book is the enormous connection between the needs of capital of American expanding industries in the United States and this recruitment of labor. So what happened basically is in the 80s is more and more Salvadorans and Guatemalans were fleeing into the United States as a result of the civil wars in their countries and the repression in their countries. They came here to the United States, and there were industries that needed cheap labor. And so you had the meatpacking industry in the Midwest began recruiting many Mexicans to come to Dodge City and to come to Des Moines and to come to all of this, the meat center of the country. And you had the poultry industry in Arkansas, and you had the textile industry in North Carolina. And they usually went by nationality. So you had a large Guatemalan population that developed in North Carolina. I think that's part of what I try to show in the book, and to a large measure the film captures this process of migration, the push of the repression that occurs in the countries, in the sending countries, and the pull of American businesses seeking cheap labor.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Juan Gonzalez is here along with Eduardo Lopez. Their film Harvest of Empire, the history of Latinos in America, based on Juan's book. We'll be back in a minute.
Hace tiempo
Blada es Patria here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. Our guests are Juan Gonzalez and Eduardo Lopez. Juan's book, Harvest of Empire, required reading in so many schools in this country, and Eduardo Lopez deciding to make this film together with the producer, Harvest of Empire, that's airing this week. I want to play a clip from Harvest of Empire that talks about the history of U.S. involvement in the Dominican Republic, where many of the immigrants here in New York City hail from. The clip prominently features the Dominican-born Pulitzer Prize-winning author Junot Diaz.
The American nation cannot, must not, and will not permit the establishment of another communist government in the Western Hemisphere.
I'm here because the United States invaded my country in 1965. An illegal invasion, completely trumped up excuse to invade the Dominican Republic and crush our democratic hopes. We've lived the consequences of that illegal invasion politically, economically, and in the bodies of the people who were wounded, the bodies of the people who were killed. We've been living it for over 40 years.
There have been two major U.S. occupations of the Dominican Republic. The first was in 1916. The U.S. Army trained a new Dominican National Guard. It handpicked a former railway security officer, Rafael Trujillo, to lead that guard. And Trujillo then uses the power of the military to seize control of the government.
He was like the most horrific imagination of this terrifying dictator. He would disappear Dominican and American citizens and kill them with impunity.
He basically ruled the Dominican Republic for 30 years with absolute, total control. He routinely kidnapped and assaulted the wives, even of his supporters. And throughout his career, made it extremely easy for American companies to do business in the Dominican Republic, but was a savage dictator. Eventually, even the United States government could not stomach his methods of operation, so the CIA joined with disgruntled military officers to back his assassination.
For the first time in 30 years, the people of the Dominican Republic are breathing the sweet air of liberty, and the streets are jammed in celebration.
Mataron al chivo en la carretera, mataron al chivo en la carretera, déjenmelo ver, déjenmelo ver, déjenmelo ver, mataron al chivo y no me lo dejan.
In 1963, you have the election of Juan Bosch. He was a liberal, a social democrat who attempted to institute new social reforms. But the Bosch government didn't last for very long. Only a few months into his term in office, there was a military coup. That military coup in turn spurred a popular insurrection that led to the U.S. invasion of the Dominican Republic in 1965. When the rebels finally agreed to lay down their arms, the United States government scheduled new elections. But it also allowed the right-hand man of Trujillo, Joaquin Balaguer, to run in those elections for president. Balaguer won that election. The problem was that there was enormous repression against the Bosch forces, killings on an almost daily basis. So the United States then began allowing large numbers of Dominican former rebels to come to the United States as a way, again, of using migration as a safety valve. Thousands of Dominicans started coming to New York City.
An excerpt of Harvest of Empire. The Pulitzer Prize-winning Dominican-American writer Junot Díaz talks about coming to this country shortly after the United States then began allowing large numbers of Dominican former rebels to migrate here.
Well, they said we're coming to the United States, whatever that meant. I thought we were just going up the road to some mystical place. When I finally saw a map in kindergarten, how far we had traveled, I remember being not only astonished, but literally terrified. My father was a standard kind of crazy Latino military guy who would check his children's hands and their shoes and their clothes and their hair before we left the house. I mean, we had to tie our shoes a certain way. I lived in what I call the little dictatorship, the little dictatorship of our house. When I immigrated to New Jersey, it was a very crazy time. I immigrated in 1974, a few months before the fall of Saigon. This was not a place that was very welcoming. I found myself facing a tremendous amount of racism and bigotry, but not just from like white Americans, from black Americans, and from Latinos. I think if every immigrant child in this country was allowed to tell the real emotional truth of their experience here, people in the United States would discover that we actually make immigration a more horrific experience than it needs to be. And I feel that as a country, we're in a dream where there are no mistakes, there is no evil, we are always good, we hurt no one. You know, you can't grow if you admit no mistakes.
Pulitzer Prize-winning Dominican-American writer Junot Díaz in Harvest of Empire, Juan, the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, and interestingly, Junot appears on the front page of the New York Times Book Review this week, with this past Sunday, with his new book. Yes, it's the Dominican Republic. Really is one of the many examples, but there are others of Salvador, Guatemala, and Cuba as well, in terms of the effect of American foreign policy on the migration. And I think that's a key issue that that I have in my book, and that the film tries to provide with new examples, because my examples are older. They've actually been able to get quite a few prominent Latinos, as well as ordinary people who went through enormous changes that people don't know much about. But I think the Dominican Republic, really, in terms of this this idea, not just of U.S. intervention in the 60s, but going back earlier in the 20th century, the United States has always really dictated a lot of what goes on in the Dominican Republic. And I think that once again, whether it was the sugar companies earlier on, and more recently the maquilas and the sweatshops of the Caribbean Basin, they've always had an enormous impact on the standard of living in these countries, as well as the push that forces people to look somehow or other to survive by coming to the United States.
Eduardo Lopez, you have remarkable footage that has never been seen before in this country throughout, and in a moment we're going to go to El Salvador to talk about what drove a lot of the migration here. Where did you get it?
Many sources, and there's a lot of footage that's never been seen, that hasn't been seen in decades. And this, again, is a testament to the team that created this. Our editor, Catherine Shields, is amazing, and so is our co-director, Peter Getzels. But I have to say about the Dominican Republic, I'd really like to make a point that one of the main reasons we made this film is really personified by Junot Díaz, who is now contributing as one of our great American writers. But his whole life was changed dramatically by our invasion of the Dominican Republic in 1965 with 23,000 Marines, something that most Americans know nothing about, because all of this history is never taught in our schools and our colleges. And so for Latinos whose life is turned upside down by our own government's actions in Latin America that many times we're unaware of, what happens is there is this tremendous disconnect. And this is, I believe, one of the reasons why so much of the ignorant rhetoric about immigrants takes hold in our country, because we don't know. And so here's Junot Diaz, whose life is completely changed because of our actions. Yet all of us as American citizens know nothing of what we did in the Dominican Republic. And I think that's one of the key parts of this film.
The significance of the invasion of 1965, Juan.
Well, I think that that sent a message throughout Latin America in that period of time, that the United States, coming out of the Kennedy era, the Alliance for Progress era, that the United States now was the enemy of change. Because obviously Juan Bosch was not a revolutionary by any stretch of the imagination. He was a liberal Democrat who wanted to have land reform and wanted to have some basic changes in the lives of the Dominican people. So when the United States government basically backed the coup against Juan Bosch, it sent a message throughout Latin America that the government was going to be, our government was going to be the enemy of real social change in the region. And that lasted really until the 90s, until this whole new era that has developed in Latin America of socially progressive governments being elected to power, getting rid of old dictatorships, old rule by the military, and giving the popular will a chance to be expressed and to bring more progressive leaders to power. But that really was from the 60s into the 90s. You had throughout Latin America the rule of these dictators and military leaders that were largely backed by the United States.
I want to go to a part of Harvest of Empire that deals with the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero on March 24th, 1980 in El Salvador. This clip features the voices of Sister Pat Murray, former U.S. Ambassador to El Salvador Robert White, and Sister Terry Alexander, Maryknoll missionary.
Cuyos lamentos suben hasta el cielo cada día.
His assassination in church stunned the entire nation.
As the crowd started to grow, they realized that this was going to be a very difficult time. And we could see all the Guardia that were on all the roofs. All of a sudden, there was a shot fired. And then the bomb went off. Everybody just scattered. Then the Guardia opened fire. Oh, Lord. It's important that the world know that we stood behind him.
For the first time, someone had faced down the Salvadoran military and say, you people are killing the people you are sworn to protect.
Father Paul Schindler had received a telephone call saying his firemen had seen the bodies of 4 women. Very definitely American. He began reading the description of the 4 women. And as he read each one, I could say, that was Jean, that's Jean, that's Dorothy, that's Eta. 3 of us knelt down there to pray. And I guess my prayer was, like Moore had said once before, how long, oh God, how long must this continue to happen?
That was Sister Terry Alexander, Maryknoll missionary. Juan Gonzalez.
Yeah, the footage that they've been able to capture there is really amazing. The actual footage, not only of the military shooting down the people at Bishop Romero's funeral, but then actually of the the nuns, of the churchwomen being dragged up, their dead bodies. This is what I've really been amazed at. In each of these countries, whether it's Guatemala, the footage of the actual a coup against Arbenz in 1954, and this incredible footage that's never been seen in the United States. Rigoberta Menchú is interviewed in the film, and she talks about the killing of her father in the Spanish embassy when the Guatemalan government burned down the embassy that was full of dissidents who had taken refuge there, including her father. And they've actually been able to find images in the archives of Guatemala of that day, and the people being burnt and the crowds outside of the Spanish embassy that day.
Eduardo Lopez, Rigoberta Menchú, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Yes, we were very happy that she participated, because I think that she really communicates something that, again, as Americans, we were never told. In the story of Guatemala, it's amazing that we had a time when in the United States we had one brother who was the head of the CIA and another brother who was the Secretary of State. And because they had received complaints from one company, the United Fruit Company, they decided that in order to help this company, they were going to take out a democratically elected government.
Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles.
Exactly. And our actions in 1954 in Guatemala, taking down the Arbenz government, unleashed decades of civil war in that country that ended up killing more than 200,000 people. And Rigoberta Menchú is the person who most personifies that struggle of the Mayan people throughout that time. And so these, again, are all kinds of situations that our own country is not aware of. And this is another reason why we just felt really compelled to make this film and to work through the 7 years in order to bring this to fruition.
One, Ann Coulter's comments on this week, when she said, I think civil rights are for blacks. What have we done to the immigrants? We owe black people something. We have a legacy of slavery. Immigrants haven't even been in this country.
Well, Ann Coulter neglects to deal with the reality of U.S.-Mexican history. The entire southwest of the United States was taken from Mexico in the Mexican-American War of 1846. California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, this is all part of Mexico. And there were actually Mexicans living on the land when the United States took it over in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. As the Mexicans have often say, the descendants of those original settlers, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And of course, she neglects to deal with the reality of the Puerto Rican existence in the United States. There are nearly 5 million, 4.6 million Puerto Ricans, U.S. citizens of Puerto Rican descent in the United States, and another 4 million, roughly, on the island of Puerto Rico. The Puerto Ricans never went anywhere. They were just captured as a prize of war in the Spanish-American War of 1898 by the United States and declared citizens by Congress against the objections, the unanimous objection of the House of Delegates of Puerto Rico, which in 1917 rejected citizenship, voted unanimously against U.S. citizenship, and yet it was imposed on the Puerto Ricans by the United States Congress. So that when Ann Coulter says, what have we done to the immigrants? Mexicans and Puerto Ricans are the two largest groups of Latinos in the United States, and that's no accident. It's a direct result of the history of the United States with these two countries.
And so explain your title, Harvest of Empire.
Well, the harvest of the empire, as I explain in both the book and in the movie, is that starting at the end of World War II, really, the people of the Third World started coming to the West. And they came precisely to those countries that had once been their colonial masters. So that in France, They don't know what to do about all the Algerians and the Tunisians and the Moroccans. In England, they don't know what to do about all the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Jamaicans. In the United States, they don't know what to do about all of the Latin Americans. Those were precisely the former colonies of those empires. And with the ending of World War II and with the independence movements that developed throughout Asia and Africa and in Latin America, the peoples of those former colonial countries are coming to the metropolis, and they're changing, transforming the very composition of those nations. And so that for us, the United States, it's not even, we're not dealing with this immigration, quote, problem alone. England has an immigration problem. France has an immigration problem. Germany has an immigration problem. And it is the harvest of the empires that made those countries so wealthy. Well, the capital came, but now the people are coming as well.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion and what it means in 2012 with the elections here, immigration policy. The film is premiering in Los Angeles at the Laemmle Theater in Pasadena and at the Quad Theater here in New York, beginning on the 28th, on Friday, right through the 4th. Here at the Quad Theater, it's on 13th Street. Eduardo Lopez is our guest, co-director and producer, along with Wendy Thompson Marquez and Juan Gonzalez, co-host on Democracy Now!, columnist with the New York Daily News, and author of Harvest of Empire, on which this film is based. And he appears in the film throughout. We'll continue this discussion in a moment.
Solo voy con mi pena, sola va mi condena, correré mi destino para burlar la ley, perdido en el corazón de la grande Babilón. Me dicen el clandestino por no llevar papel, pa' una ciudad del norte yo me fui a trabajar, mi vida la dejé entre Ceuta y Gibraltar, soy una raya en el mar, fantasma en la ciudad, mi vida va prohibida, dice la autoridad, solo voy con mi pena, sola va mi condena, correré mi destino por no llevar papel.
Manu Chao, Clandestino, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're spending the hour talking about a new film, given the significance of the issue of immigration in this country today. The film is called Harvest of Empire. It is opening at the Laemmle Theater in Pasadena in California and at the Quad Theater here in New York on 13th Street on Friday through October 4th. Eduardo Lopez is with us. He is co-director and producer, along with Wendy Thompson Marquez, of this remarkable film that's based on co-host Juan Gonzalez's book, Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America. Eduardo, the last clip we played was of Archbishop Romero, March 24th, 1980. He is assassinated in El Salvador by a U.S.-backed death squad. You yourself are from El Salvador, an immigrant here in the United States.
This is, again, one of the reasons why we produced this film and why we feel so strongly about it, because as Juan points out in his book and in the film, El Salvador is really maybe the latest and one of the clearest examples of this direct connection between our foreign policy and immigration. In the census of 1980, there were less than 100,000 Salvadorans listed, and just 32 years later, we are poised to become the third largest Latino population in the United States. You have to remember, El Salvador is the smallest country in all of the Americas. And yet, how is it that in only 32 years, we are about to become the third largest Latino population in the United States? If all of the rhetoric about immigration was true, and it's poverty or our dysfunctional governments, if that were really the cause of immigration, you would have had people coming from El Salvador forever. But that's not the case. People started coming in 1980 because of the war. and specifically because of our own country's actions in the war. In the film, we talk about the School of the Americas and how most of the human rights abuses and the massacres, including the killing of the nuns and the murder of Archbishop Romero, was really done by people trained at the School of the Americas by our own country. And so this is a clear example of how this connection continues to exist. It's not something that just happened 150 years ago. It continues to happen.
And of course, you have the latest presidential link, this remarkable story surrounding Bain, how Mitt Romney helped found Bain Capital with investments from Central American Central American elites linked to the death squads in El Salvador. Now, this is something we reported on and discussed on Democracy Now! After initially struggling to find investors, Romney traveled to Miami in 1983 to win pledges of $9 million, 40% of Bain's startup money. Some investors had extensive ties to death squads responsible for a vast majority of the deaths in Salvador in the 1980s. The investors include the Salaverria family, whom the former U.S. ambassador to El Salvador, Robert White, previously accused of directly funding the Salvadoran paramilitaries. In his memoir, former Bain executive Harry Strawn writes, Romney pushed aside his own misgivings about the investors to accept their backing. He writes, these Latin American friends have loyally rolled over investments in succeeding funds, actively participated in Bain Capital's May investor meetings, and are still today one of the largest investor groups in Bain Capital. I want to get your comment then, Juan's.
I think that if Governor Romney had ever bothered to meet one of the torture victims of the death squads, or one of the family members of the people who were brutally killed during that time, maybe he would have thought twice about accepting that blood money. To me, it's really unacceptable. When you looked at the, I believe it was around $9 million that he accepted as the investment money. But where this money came from and the people who gave it to him is something that he really should have looked at much more closely, because it is related to the most terrible atrocities. As Ambassador Robert White says in our film, when you arm a group of uniformed butchers, the people don't emigrate, they flee. And to me, it's unbelievable that now Governor Romney talks about immigrants with derogatory terms like illegals, and yet he profited from the funding that actually caused so much of the immigration to the United States from El Salvador.
In fact, Mitt Romney talks about people should self-deport. Juan Gonzalez.
Yeah. Well, I think that throughout Central America, in Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, there's always been a very small elite that has benefited from being a comprador group, basically facilitating the exploitation of their own countries by American businesses largely. And I think that that Romney was so closely tied to some of the Salvadoran compradors is really astounding in terms of, as Eduardo says, his stance on immigration. And in the film, they actually have an incredible, one of the most powerful portions of the film is the testimony of one of the Salvadoran torture victims who became an immigrant or a refugee here in the United States. And she talks in vivid terms about the kinds of tortures that she went through and how somehow managed to survive. And I think that it's that Romney got his start in Bain through this investment by some of these Salvadoran elites is really telling in itself.
And now I want to get your comment on the current presidential candidates talking about immigration. In an appearance on the Spanish language network Univision last Thursday, President Obama faced tough questions over his immigration policies, including his failure to fulfill a campaign promise to enact comprehensive immigration reform during his first year in office. Obama called the lack of immigration reform the biggest failure of his presidency, but attempted to shift blame for the failure to Republicans.
When we talked about immigration reform in the first year, that's before the economy was on the verge of collapse. Lehman Brothers had collapsed. The stock market was collapsing. And so my first priority was making sure that we prevented us from going into a Great Depression. And I think everybody here remembers where we were 4 years ago. What I confess I did not expect, and so I'm happy to take responsibility for being naive here, is that Republicans who had previously supported comprehensive immigration reform, my opponent in 2008, who had been a champion of it, and who attended these meetings, suddenly would walk away.
President Obama's comments come as his administration faces scrutiny for deporting and detaining a record number of undocumented people. Nearly 400,000 immigrants were deported during the last fiscal year. Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney also fielded questions about immigration during a Wednesday appearance on Univision. Romney attacked Obama's deferred action policy that allows some young undocumented people to remain in the country temporarily, saying a more permanent solution was needed. Romney was accused during the appearance of avoiding specific details about a possible permanent solution and asked to respond with a yes or no on whether he would deport undocumented youth.
We're not going to round up people around the country and deport them. That's not. I said during my primary campaign, time and again, we're not going to round up 12 million people. That includes the kids and the parents, and have everyone deported. Our system isn't to deport people. We need to provide a long-term solution. And I've described the fact that I would be in support of a program that said that people who served in our military could be permanent residents of the United States. Unlike the president, when I'm president, I will actually do what I promised. I will put in place an immigration reform plan that solves this issue.
That was Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney speaking during an interview on Univision last week. In fact, he got much louder applause than President Obama did, Juan Gonzalez.
Well, yes, he did, because as some of the reports came out afterwards, he actually trucked in supporters. The original agreement was that Romney would be given tickets to disperse to young Republicans on the University of Miami campus, but they apparently could not find enough students on the University of Miami campus to fill the theater, so they insisted on busing in supporters from outside the university who were a lot more rowdy, I think, than the students would have been. But I think that one of the things that I think it's important to understand about the current immigration debate in the country, as I mentioned in the film, the last, quote, amnesty, or attempt at comprehensive immigration reform in this country came under the most conservative president in our lifetime, which was Ronald Reagan. It was Reagan who approved who signed into law the Simpson-Rodino bill that provided the opportunity for about 3 million people who were then in the country undocumented to legalize their status. We're now talking about 11 to 12 million people that are undocumented in the United States. And I think that the most extreme right of the Republican Party understands that if 11 to 12 million people are able to legalize their status and become voters, it will change the political landscape of America for decades to come. They understand that it could spell the doom of the Republican Party for a generation to come. And that's why I think they are struggling so much against it, just as they did back in '86 with the first comprehensive immigration reform. So I think that there is a political reason for this vehement opposition to basically adjusting the status for folks that really, for the most part, are not criminals, are hardworking people. They were forced to, by a variety of reasons, leave their countries, and they're contributing to the prosperity of the United States. So that, and especially the dreamers, the young folks. So I think that that's what's at stake here, is that not only a humanitarian gesture to the people that are here, but also the political repercussions that will come about as a result.
Well, Juan and Eduardo, thank you so much for being with us. Eduardo Lopez is the co-director and producer with Wendy Thompson Lopez of the feature-length documentary Harvest of Empire, which is based on Juan Gonzalez's book by the same title. We thank you so much. At the Laemmle Theater on Friday night in Pasadena, here in New York, at the Quad Theater on 13th Street in New York through October 4th. This is a film certainly certainly worth seeing. What a remarkable education. Well, our 100-city Silence Majority tour continues on Wednesday in Storrs, Connecticut, the University of Connecticut Student Union Theater at 7:30. Then on Thursday in Arlington, Virginia, at George Mason University's Founders Hall, room 125 at 7:30. On Friday,
See, that was a fantastic shot, which I think is exemplary, showing the best of what Democracy Now! Is actually capable of doing. As I said initially, Democracy Now! Independent media outlet is the world's best news covering station on Latin America. It's more objective. It is not in the hands of vested interests. It is simply the station that does the job that should be done by national television like Fox News, like CNN, like the BBC, and other media. This station covers the people that just otherwise don't get coverage in mainstream media around the world. As a supplement to this, I'd like to mention two other stations in the world. I'm convinced that the best media fighting corporate fascism today, 2012, is Russia Today. Russia Today, www.rt.com. www.rt.com, Russia Today, for the best media fighting corporate fascism consistently, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The other station is PressTV from Tehran. This station is the best TV station, internet TV, media outlet, covering the people's uprisings around the world. There is, in my opinion, no other station that covers people's uprisings as much and as well as PressTV. You should really have a look at it. Maybe right now we can have a look at it right here so we can just get an idea about what Tehran looks like. PressTV. So here you go into PressTV. It looks like their homepage looks like this. It is presstv.ir. When you get in on this front page and you want to go to a television, internet TV from PressTV, then you go to right here where you see the Mercure. Right here. Watch live. Go down under this Adobe Flash text. Click. And we should this is PressTV. Best TV station in the world covering people's uprisings around the world. That is my experience for the last couple of years. Let's try Russia Today so you can have a look at Russia Today. Russia Today, RT.com. Let's get here's the front page. Go to the section called rt.com/on-air for live TV. You can see it says live right there. And This is the way it looks. Against corporate fascism, the world's best media outlet against corporate fascism. Okay, guys, that was a couple of rundown, checking out, commenting on 3 of the world's best TV stations, free of charge on the internet. Okay, have a great day.